Next podcast with Chris and Todd.
Well, hey, welcome back to the next podcast. Hey, Todd, how you feeling today?
Feeling good, feeling great, feeling like I should.
Okay.
You like that? You like that?
Fantastic, man. I don't even know what to say.
How are you feeling, Chris?
You know what? Feel pretty fantastic.
Not a great answer. We were looking for better. Needed a little rhyme, a little something to go along with that.
All right. Sit right back and let's bust a rhyme. We're going to do some now because it's podcast time.
Oh, okay. I see that. Look at that.
Good, great, feeling fantastic, Todd. Right along with you.
Man, that's great. People are enjoying this right now.
Yeah, none of this is
or
gonna
they
get
turned
on,
it off.
Yeah,
Either
none
one.
of this is going to get on the podcast. So, like, we're just going to, and if Milton leaves it on, kudos to him.
Yes. Thank you, Milton.
You know, we appreciate Milton. Has to trudge through all of the different things that we say to get the content on there that is on there.
Yeah, making us look good, sound good. That's not an easy task.
That's just pretty much Milton,
Yeah.
making everything look better.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what I like about him.
True.
That, and he has a vast knowledge of the ATL, you know, so it's good stuff. We have vast knowledge of the RCSD, so here we go. Rapid City, South Dakota, come on, represent. No,
Oh, yeah. Said no one ever.
no one. That's right. Are you done with the RC? Anyway, we're going to talk about sacrifice today, which is really just a bad transition from RC to let's talk about sacrifice.
Yay, let's do it.
Because everybody's favorite word, never. Yeah. Sacrifice. This idea of something that is vital to the way we live. And we do it all the time. You know, there's always, I think there's a sexier word for sacrifice. Sometimes it's like trade-off, right? But ultimately, the goal of getting the sacrifice, we're in this kingdom economics series right now, and this thought continues to come up of like, what is it to sacrifice? Because I think so many things in our life rally around this idea of like, it's a selfish thing. I want, I don't have, I need, I should get. Why don't I have that? What do I need to do to get that? And sacrifice is a word that continues to creep up in my mind. And you and I have been talking about it, you know, just trying to, how do we do it well? And how do we do it with a great attitude? And how do we do it with a willingness, which is not something that we're willing to do unless we see it. You know, there's so many facets to sacrifice, right? Like,
And especially with just thinking through, okay, this is God's world, God's economy. He runs it. He gives us a lot of freedom and space in it. But ultimately, for it to be what I think God designed it to be, sacrifice is a huge part of it.
Yeah, I would agree.
Now, we understand within relationships, sacrifice is a pretty normal conversation. If we don't sacrifice for, like, and by sacrifice, if we don't give time, if we don't give of our resources to the relationships that we have, then I don't know if you could really say you have relationships. You're just taking what you want from them. And I think you said trade-off. I think some of that is, if we think of sacrifice as trade-off, then I think we're missing it because we're going, well, what am I getting out of this?
Yeah, and that is that selfish aspect that always creeps in there, right? Like, if I'm going to do this, then I need to get this.
Or I should get something out of it.
Yes, yeah. And, you know, and granted, like I said, we could go a lot of different exit roads with sacrifice because people think of like, well, I take 500 shots a day, so I'm sacrificing to get to the pros. But we're speaking of God's economy and the idea of what we give and what we sacrifice for God and what He calls us to is a life of sacrifice. To not, Philippians, you know, don't think of yourselves more highly than you ought. Okay, I've got to sacrifice what I think I would love all the time. And be willing to sacrifice, because sacrifice for family, sacrifice your job, and some of us have found dead end roads in the middle of that, and some of us found amazing fulfillment in that. So how do you balance those, and how do you get to a place where that's not a taboo word or not something you're ready to entertain, but it's something you're willing to say, okay, I'm willing to have a conversation about sacrificing what God will want. And you brought up time, talent, treasure, you know, is a great way, I think, to say it. And man, selfishness is always going to be a battle, but a willingness to lay it down and saying, God, whatever you have, whatever you want, I want to be willing to entertain that conversation.
When it comes to that kind of sacrifice conversation, I think a lot of us struggle with the idea of it being all God's. I think we know that.
Yep.
Like God created time. God created these resources. But then we work and we go, I earned that.
Yeah.
I did that. I need this time. I need those things. And so we run the risk of thinking we're in charge or thinking we're in control when really we're not. I always go back to like, okay, you earned that money, but who gave you the gift to be able to do that job? And who gave you the ability to, I mean, even thinking through like that job wouldn't exist if the earth didn't exist and that business didn't exist and the world is just working perfectly to where you can breathe and you can walk and you can do all these things. Yeah. And so we take all of that for granted.
Yeah.
And God's going, okay, wow, you think you earned that?
Yeah.
Like I'm proud of you. You did some work. That's awesome.
Yep.
But I mean, we're doing this with our kids right now. We have a chore chart, and it's funny to kind of have this conversation.
When you brought that up here a couple weeks ago, I was like, oh, how's that going for you, buddy?
But it's just funny the conversations you have as parents because you're like, you paid for the house, you got the cars, you've got all this. But then these kids make these demands.
I know.
And you're like, you have nothing.
Did your dad ever say to you when listen, I brought you into this world.
I can take you out.
That's right. I'm like, where are you going to take me out? I'm low on gas and you need a jacket. Anyway.
And it sounds like you had some witty comebacks to that one.
That's right. Yeah. Doug and I probably didn't see eye to eye all the time. But anyway.
So I would just say all of that to kind of go, I think it's very easy for us to have just these little slips of just lies that like, no, I deserve this. No, I need this, or I earned this. Yeah. And it's like, you worked for it. Good. But you got to remember all these other things that you didn't do that made it possible for you to work today.
Well, yeah. And if you want to break down the chore idea, and I get it. I mean, I'm not against chores because we went through that phase too. And then I heard something one time and I loved it. There are things you do because you are just part of the house.
Yep. We talk about that too.
And there are things that you do that are extra and great. Hey, I just want to bless you. And now it's like, I don't want $3.50, Dad. I just want you to take me to Starbucks for a drink. And I'm like, but that's $6.50 and you only did $2.50 worth of work. I was trying to bless you.
The negotiating,
but really,
you just take me out.
It really is. It's important for kids to understand the idea of sacrificing because they belong to something, and that's the idea of. Yes. I think this idea, like you belong to God, and there are things that you should just want to sacrifice because you said it in there. Like you got to wake up today, and that's been a part of one of my prayers lately. Like God, thanks for just another day. Like you may come back tomorrow. That's great. You may not come back for 1,000 years. But I get to put my feet on the ground today, and I get to experience a day that you made. And to go right to Scripture, may I rejoice and be glad in it. Okay, a lot of us are fine rejoicing in the fact that we're alive. We're not fine rejoicing in the fact that we have to maybe give something up, or that we're sacrificing because of what's been sacrificed for us.
I think what's sad within, and we're mainly talking about, if you believe there is a God, then why would you not sacrifice for them? Yep. And as pastors, in church, like the amount of people who give within a church, always kind of like for the amount that show up. Yep. I mean, you're in that 10 to 20% usually are taken care of, making sure the church is functioning and going. But then also in the serving component of that, you're also like, man, I wish. Yeah. Why is this a struggle to give of time? But what's even sometimes harder to watch is like pastors who struggle within this area.
No, absolutely.
And so I get the struggle, but I think it's weird that we understand it in all other areas of our life.
Yeah.
But and even people who don't believe in God go, well, you got to sacrifice.
Yeah, absolutely.
If it matters to you, you got to have to sacrifice. So it's crazy how we'll do that for the things that we think are important. But then if we believe God created all this and he asks us to sacrifice, like that becomes like, I don't know.
Yeah. I love.
Does God really need my? You run into these weird questions like,
yeah.
does God need my money? No, but that's not what this is about.
No, it's not about
Does
God.
God really need my time? No, but why would?
Yeah.
Like, what if you said that, like, in any other context, we'd all look at you like, you really think that about your spouse? Like, does she really need my money?
Yeah.
Well, that sounds unhealthy. Does my kid really need me to, like, spend all the money? Like, now, hear me, there's some lines there, but I'm like, they're not asking for something crazy here.
No.
They just want to go on a date with you. Yep. Do we really need to spend that time?
Let's have the ROI conversation, the return on investment.
Oh, yeah.
Let's go. But I love the terminology that we have as a church. And it's not like it's new to us, but the run from zero.
Yeah, I love it too.
It just works so well because it puts it in brass tacks, right? Like, okay, if you're doing nothing, man, then we have to have a conversation, right? Because
we all start at nothing.
Yes,
because it's not like you just grow up going, all right, you know what? It's time to give. It's time to serve.
Yeah.
And so I understand sacrifice is a learned behavior, a learned trait, a learned characteristic.
Yeah. But, there are other words that can fit into this mix too. Like, were you taught generosity? Were you taught a scarcity mindset? Were you taught a minimalistic thinking? Or were you taught whose it was from the beginning? And granted, all of us grew up in different houses, right? Like, the house I grew up in and our view of money and what we did and what we had is different than yours. But that doesn't negate us from having to come to a place of learning and growing and to understand, where is my place in all this? As I grow and mature in my relationship with Jesus, this next conversation, no matter where you're at in a relationship with Jesus, running from zero and then schedule the sacrifice, this opportunity that we have that so often we don't take, we pack it up. Well, I'm doing this, so this can wait. I'm doing this, so this can wait. But God's so interested in our willingness to say yes to him or to not shut him down and be
dependent on him.
Yep.
Because ultimately he wants to prove to you that he's a provider. Mm-hmm. He wants to take care of you.
Yes.
And but if you never put yourself in that situation, then it won't happen. Like, I go back to as just parenting is like, as parents, we see our kids at the most vulnerable. They need us. Yep. Like, they can't raise themselves. When they're a baby, they are so dependent. And we're eventually coaching them to become, hey, you can go do this on your own. God kind of does that on a level, but he does it when we're adults, I feel like, or when we're older. And he starts with kids, don't get me wrong.
Sure.
But he's coaching, like, I want you to constantly be dependent on me. But when you learn that, it's part of the relationship.
Yep.
Not something that we have to like keep navigating over and over and over again.
Yeah.
It can be. I shouldn't say that because it's sometimes God's going, okay, we're dependent on this level. Now I'm going to stretch that even more. But God's just going, that's what makes the relationship real. I was talking to somebody recently and they shared, I think, 3 different stories with me of just how sacrifice has really changed their life and how they perceive God. And so one of the stories she shared is like, this is the most powerful one. I was single parent at the time and one of my family members passed away. Didn't know how I was going to pay for this.
Sure.
And, but I knew growing up that I should tithe.
Yeah.
So I had this dilemma. It's like, I can tithe, but man, that's the plane ticket. That's the money I'm supposed to. But she's like, all right, God, I'm going to trust you. And so she tithed. Next day at work, the work had put together just, hey, we took an offering for you. Here's a certain amount. Gave her enough to get plane ticket, hotel, all that kind of stuff to go see her family and be there during that time. And she goes, not only did it financially prove something, but emotionally, I was like, man, God is here. God is doing something. And I think God goes, I want to do those things for you. Yeah. Just like as a parent, we want to do things for them. Like there's something about being able to hold your child and how sad that is when they get too old and you're like, I can't hold you anymore.
I just want a hug.
Yeah.
Just give me a hug.
Or just to have them around, like to see, your parents, my parents are in this like they don't see us that much anymore. Yeah. It's a different, and there's parts that you miss of that.
Yeah.
God's not going to have those kind of moments, but he's going like, I still want to have those where you see that you can rely on me.
Yeah.
And so that's why the sacrifice conversation is so big. Because if we go, almost we get in this like, God, let me prove to you.
Yeah.
I can take care of the money you've given me. I can take care of the time you've given me. And God's like, I don't want you to be independent of me.
I think there's an interesting part in there. Like you said it, like, God, I can take care of this. I can manage it well as long as it's tangible and manageable.
Yes.
But when it, like if that boundary's there, like this is the manageable expectations. And then you go outside of those manageable and you've got to trust or believe, or something calls you to say, okay, are you willing to give above and beyond? Are you willing to take on something that,
or circumstances change
yes,
that you weren't planning on?
Yep. Somebody loses their job, whatever happens. And God's like, are you still going to trust me in those moments? And I think those are, I mean, manageable is such a crazy word, because we like manageable, whether emotionally or financially or anything. But man, when God doesn't operate just in manageable, like, like we're looking at stories, feeding 5,000. That's not manageable with fish and loaves.
Disciples had no clue how they were going to do that. Like, we can't just produce food.
But here's the kicker out of that. God already knew what he was going to do, right? Like,
but what was he teaching them? Like, I've got you.
Yep.
Like, hey, go after
dependence on me.
And so that's the part that I go in this conversation. It's so big. And I think what's hard for us, anybody listening who lives in America, needs versus a wants conversation, it is hard for us to be, not saying desperate, but we can usually go take care of a lot of things.
I would agree.
I need to eat. I can go pay for it. If I need this, I need this. Not saying, hey, there's times where we're all like, man, I cannot make ends meet. I get that. Sure. I totally understand that. We've all been there on some levels. But let's not try to say, hey, I'm in the same as a third world country. No, you're not.
No.
You're not even close to that. Because if you have a place to at least go to, you have a car that you can use, and you have some kind of food, you are far better off than most of the world.
Yeah, I would agree. And, and I tell this to couples all the time. There's a couple of thoughts. A Taco John's date night is just as good as a Minerva's or an Outback Steakhouse date night, right? It's about the time. It's about the quantity, the quality of time, not the quantity, whatever. But also, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it had, I don't know what's the name of the guy on Shark Tank, one of the older guys on Shark Tank.
Oh, yeah.
Whatever his name is, yada, yada. And they were talking about how do we get better with money? He goes like, we got to stop buying crap. He goes, because that's where Americans waste most of their money is on clothes in your closet. And he goes, if we curb that, you would begin to be exponentially better. Like, and it is sometimes a sacrifice, because, you can have like, well, this is what I grew up with. This is the way I grew up. This is the mindset and mentality. Okay. But if wherever you're at right now in this relationship with God, sometimes it is saying no to some things so that you can say yes to some things. And you have to be okay with that decision, walking that out, which is not always fun, because we like what we like. I get it. But I love, and you alluded to it, and it's dangerous sometimes. We give to God, okay, God's going to do this. Sometimes it is a longer growth process, and we want to ever be a part of. Like, God's teaching me in this season. God, are you still teaching me? Why are you still teaching me? When's the season going to end? And sometimes it really is that battle of dependence on, he's the one that I know has me in the middle of this. And he called me to live this way. He called me to sacrifice in this. So am I going to trust walking this out? And sometimes he will bring, like you said, that perfect amount or in abundance. And sometimes it's learning to adjust to live a different way.
Here's some, I guess, crazy things I'd want you to maybe ask yourself and work through. Would it be cruel of God to create a world where there's just people who don't ever have enough?
Yeah.
Or did God create a world that there's actually enough currently, but within humanity, there's greed?
Yeah.
And so greed has actually caused the issue to where there's needs not being met. Because my argument would be like, God gave us all enough.
Yep.
if we learn to sacrifice for each other and learn to get greed out, actually everybody's needs in this world would be taken care of.
Hands down.
Like God did not create a world where there's not enough resources. That's not who he is. He did not create scarcity. He did not create these things. Where that comes from is humanity leading in a way that's going, well, I want more, and I don't care if they don't have enough.
Yeah.
And so that's the part that you got to think, like, what God is ultimately teaching is teaching all of us that if we sacrifice, we can all help each other and take care of each other. And it's all going to God teaching us how to be dependent on him.
Yeah.
There's a bigger lesson in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I go, you're right. God does not need our money in regards to church. God does not need our time just to feel more special. But he goes, but I want it because I want you to be healthy.
Yeah.
And he goes, I did it first. Because there's the other part of, like, God is not asking us to do something that he didn't do himself. He gave his first son, just like he asked us to give our first.
Yeah. I mean, we live circling around this idea of, like, greed will make you sick, right? Like this.
We know it's bad.
We know it's bad.
We know it is.
Yeah.
And I think it's like, none of us would say we're greedy,
Yeah.
but it is a subtle greed.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Satan knows what he's doing. Like, oh man, you need that. If you've ever had the moment, like, I just need to buy something to feel better. Just think about that for a little bit. We've all been there.
Yeah.
Like, this house, this car, this thing, these clothes, this sport, this event, this entertainment would make me feel better.
There's a statement in the premarital counseling that I use, and I'm going to butcher it, which is sad. Like talking about contentment, like your income will never outgrow your need. Like, I think that's, anyway, just this idea of, like, no amount of money is going to fix what's going on inside of you. Like, you have to, Paul talks about it. Like, I've learned to be content.
Believe it will.
We do. We believe, if, like you just said, if I can get this, if we just had the lake house, then we wouldn't have to, if we just had the boat.
It'd solve all of our family issues.
I know. We would spend more time together.
Yep.
Well, yeah, but it's also taken that much more to make that happen. And hear me, I know what's being said as soon as I say that. Well, what's wrong with having a boat or pontoon? Nothing. I want to come be on your boat or pontoon. Right. Anyway, but willingness, man, that contentment, that I can't get away from that word, like being content no matter the circumstance.
But without sacrifice, you will never understand what it means to be content.
Yep, absolutely.
Like, there's just no way. Like, learning to live below your means is because I'm willing to sacrifice that because these things are healthier. That's learning to be content.
Yep.
I want to sacrifice this because I want to have a deeper relationship with God. That's content.
Yeah.
I want to have a relationship here.
Yeah.
I'm giving up these things so that these things can get healthier.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's just, like, when it comes to the how-to, like, the questions that as a church we usually, is it a will I or won't I?
Yeah.
And so you and I have talked through a lot of the theological components. Here's why you sacrifice, those kind of things. The other part is can I, can't I?
Yeah.
As in, like, I don't know how all my money's gone.
Yeah.
Like, I can barely afford my apartment right now, or I can barely afford these things. And I go, okay. But I would also say, sometimes it's putting together a plan and moving from zero to something.
Yes.
Something to scheduled.
Yeah.
Scheduled to sacrifice.
Yep.
And I would say getting to that spot to where God said ultimately all the resources we have, starting with 10%,
Yep.
you're going, start there. But then also it's, hey, it may be more.
Yeah.
If not, God says use all of this for the benefit of others.
Yeah. And
everything you have for the benefit of others.
And I'm glad we didn't just focus it in on money. Like, you talk about time. Like,
same conversation.
And you just said it, like the rent, and I get it. The rent conversation in our area is high, and
it's
awful. What your opinion on Dave Ramsey? Yada yada. I get it. But there's still some great principles there.
Yep.
For a season, sometimes you may have to sacrifice some time to take care of some stuff. We've been there. Like, there was times where I had to get a second job, or and that's not the case for the whole time, but in a season, because then you have to look at, okay, where am I wasting time where I could be sacrificing time? Where am I, and that's another conversation, obviously, but you have to have that when it comes to sacrifice. Am I giving the best of my time to the things that are going to matter most, to take care of what matters to me and what we say matters as a family, and to be able to to do the things that we believe God's calling us to do, whether that's support somebody, you know, overseas, or be a part of a ministry here, or give to your local church, or, you know, just, yeah, it's such a powerful conversation that has to take place in your life. It can't be one that we ignore, because if we ignore it, we're putting it on a shelf, and we're ignoring something that I believe God says, I want you to grow in this. I want you to surrender this. I want you to be willing to say yes to what I want you to say yes to. And that, hands down, running from zero to do something that you're not doing. And maybe you know what that is right now, or maybe you don't.
It's an interesting thought I had the other day of just thinking through, and this is like, okay, I only have so much time, but if you added up all the time that you have from zero all the way up to your death, like the amount of hours, you'd be like, yeah, it's actually a good amount of hours.
Substantial.
But also think about putting money, like how much money actually goes through your hands.
Yeah.
Like you think about the money you make, you times that by the years that you've worked there, all that kind of stuff. And then percentage-wise, you start playing this out. Like, all right, how much did I give to God?
Yeah.
He allowed all that time for me to have. He gave me all that money to go through my hands.
Yeah.
Not saying he knew it had to go to some other places, all that stuff. He knew that. But if you gave somebody all of that as a gift to them, and you're like, hey, I want some back because I want us to have a relationship.
Yeah.
I think all of us go, okay, that makes sense. Like that's healthy. And not only that, he's already sacrificed. He gave you the time. He gave you this treasure, but he also gave you the ability, like, hey, sin and death, they don't have to define you either, because I sacrificed my son for that. Like, you just think about that conversation for a little bit. And if you believe that, then be like, someday you'll have to give an account.
Yep.
Of going, God's going to go, I gave you this many hours, this many days.
Yep.
What'd you do with them?
Yeah, there's this idea of poker chips, like all in, and you know, there's even those studies of like our brain capacity and the amount we do. Like I think what David mentioned it when we think we're somebody's sermon, when we think we're at this, we're really only at like 40%. So that means we have like 60 that we're not even using. And like that idea of, I think sometimes for me, that's the biggest conversation. Like, okay, if I'm giving this, what would it look like to sacrifice a little bit more and a little bit more? And I think that's a fair conversation to have. Like, what is, if we are comfortable here, which I believe God calls us out of comfort, what would a little bit more and a little bit more look like? And God's not going to lead you somewhere that he's not already been there, that he's not already provided, that he doesn't already have a plan for how it's going to go. But man, if we're reliant and we're trusting him in it, there is such beauty on the other side of that.
I think God's mindset and heart for us would be, it's not just, okay, checklist, I did it. Yeah. There's some value to that, don't get me wrong. But like, he also goes like, man, well done, good and faithful servant. I gave you this and you did 20, 30, 40, 50%, if not more. Yeah. Proud of you for that. Mm-hmm. Like that, as a parent, we get excited to see our kids sacrifice and go, man, you put a lot of effort. You put a lot of work into that.
And we also go the other side of it. Like, and this is the hard part as a parent, right? Oh man, you are operating on 10% right now. I want to see like 30% more and where you could go if you did that.
Right.
You know, so.
And God's not like going to be like, you only did 10%. Like, I mean,
you done messed up.
Yeah. But he's going to be like, I just think there's that mindset of having to give an account of all the money that came through my hands, all the time that I had, the talents he's given me. I have to give an account for that someday. Yeah. And I hope that motivates us to go, then I want to sacrifice and I can sacrifice regardless of my circumstances. They could change tomorrow, but I can.
Yeah. And the thought that keeps coming through my mind is, if that's the case, then what are the things that are going to last? And that has to be a part of our conversation. Like all that's done in this world is one thing, but is it done for the things that are going to last and make an eternal difference?
That's the whole scripture of don't build your stuff on things of this earth where moth and stuff destroy.
Yeah. And
on future things.
And sadly, the older I get, the more I come to the realization that maybe I didn't spend as much time on the things that last that I have needed to. And man, it's so important to have that conversation because I want want my girls to know Jesus. I want people that I support to, man, it just really is, like you said, give an account. And that's a scary thing, right? Like, because I mean, just even on this world, tax season comes, tax season goes. I have to give an account. Where'd all that money go?
Mm-hmm.
And then you get the end. Oh, I made that much money? What? And like, what did I do with it? And I'm giving an account. And man, sitting in front of, and I know this takes like a serious term, but I mean, kingdom economics, this idea of giving an account for what I did with what he entrusted with me.
Got to hold that weight.
It's got to be,
you.
it's got to be part of the conversation for you.
Because I think too many, and I'm there, I'll be guilty of myself. We live a life not thinking about that, not thinking the weight of that. Because if we know that's coming, that should change how we see sacrifice.
I would agree. I hate ending on that, but it really is a good reminder. Like, hey, what are you running from zero from?
Yep.
Where are you doing something? Where are you scheduling something? And where are you sacrificing? And it's a process. But I would say take some time, sit down on your budget, sit down in prayer. Hey, let's talk about what we could do. Like, what would begin making an impact? What would begin seeing us as a family sacrifice, me as an individual, to make a kingdom impact?
And I know, I mean, we're as a church, we probably started this already with the 40 days kind of leading up to Easter. But I'd say maybe that's step one. Like, well, two things we're doing in that. You got an option to start giving and sacrificing in that, but also 40 days of prayer where you're giving your time and your treasure, going, God, it's leading into Easter. It's Lent season. I'm supposed to sacrifice. Here you go. I'm taking a step.
Yep. And it's powerful. And we believe it. When you take a step, remember, God's already been there and he's going to meet you there. And it's awesome. It's exciting to think about people taking a step and being able to have those conversations like you talked about. Because, you know, I've got a friend.
I want more stories like that. I want everyone to experience that moment to where you recognize how real God is and how much he wants to take care of you.
That's just it. He's going to take care of you.
He will.
He will. Man, I love it. So, hey, thanks for having that conversation today.
It's good stuff. And we're excited for you guys as you go on this journey. And if you need help, hey, we'd love to help you.
Yeah, we'll see you next time.